Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is John, and welcome to week two of the class. I think we had a good start for week one. I appreciate all the engagement. Appreciate you sharing those experiences, and I think it just gets us off on the right foot in terms of thinking about um, legal issues in the healthcare space as we sort of get into and transition into our case study that we'll be reviewing for most of the class. I just a couple things. Obviously I'll be grading the first week assignments later this week, but I do want to touch on those assignments and just help us to think through how those assignments will play into the assignments that we'll be doing later in the course. So the first one, with respect to the ethics theories and principles, I think it gives us a good foundation in terms of thinking about healthcare problems through the lenses of different ethical theories. We're going to be setting that aside for the next few weeks and revisit those as we think through the ethical issues in the Itraldi case. So just keep those on the back burner. The second assignment is something that we'll be using and drawing upon in the very near future. So really the purpose of that assignment is to give you the opportunity to really dig into and review the case and understand the facts of the case. All the questions that will be answered or that will be asked of you in these various assignments can be answered in that case. And so it's important to really give that assignment some attention and really think through the facts. Because as I mentioned in the video last week, facts are important. And we're going to be drawing on those facts in our legal analyses. The key to a good legal analysis is the use of specific facts. And so that's the purpose of that assignment, is really to outline those facts. And then later on, as we think through the various legal analyses that we'll be doing, determining what facts are relevant, what facts are material to those analyses. So enough on that. So this second week, we're going to talk about we're going to dig into some of the legal components, legal issues, what that means, the legal system itself. If you look in your textbook, there's some overview of the legal system. I'm not a litigator. I've been to state court a few times, but most of the litigation I do is in the administrative courts. And so things like practitioner disciplinary matters, Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement matters. I've been to the administrative courts a handful of times. So just generally government reimbursement matters, government licensing matters, and things like that. But there's a whole overview of the legal system that I think it's I don't know, you need to spend too much time on it, but it's kind of good and interesting if you want to look through how our legal system functions. And of course, feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that. I do want to spend most of our time this week and in this video talking about medical negligence and professional liability generally. You'll see as you get into the first draft of your Itraldi project on the legal component side, or on the legal side, you'll be asked to outline the legal components of that case. So let's talk about what that means. What are the legal components? First, when we think about medical malpractice or professional liability, many of you work in the healthcare space, or even practitioners, clinical practitioners, and so you understand that liability does not automatically arise when something goes wrong, right? I mean, you could, as a practitioner, as a physician, you can do everything correctly, and still something could go wrong. So I think there's a question in chapter 6 of your text that asks whether you could be sued for negligence if a patient is injured through no fault of your own. And the answer is yes. I mean, frankly, you can be sued for anything. I mean, if something goes wrong, there's certainly a risk of being sued for liability, for professional liability. That doesn't mean that it's a good case. That doesn't mean that they'll win. In order to demonstrate professional liability or medical negligence, the plaintiff has to demonstrate 4 elements. So there are 4 elements to medical negligence, and that's important not only just generally with respect to how we define medical negligence, but it's important for your assignment because each one of these elements is a legal component that you'll need to analyze individually. And that's important because even if even one of those elements cannot be shown, or if there's an absence of one of those elements, that means there's no legal negligence. There's no medical negligence in the legal sense. So remember last week I said we're not talking about negligence in terms of, oh, I made a mistake. I was negligent and I left the garage door open last night. That's not what we're talking about. Negligent is a legal term of art. And when you say medical negligence, you're automatically thinking of the 4 elements that comprise medical negligence. So the first element in medical negligence is a duty. So I think your text refers to the elements as the 4 Ds. The first one is duty. It's a professional duty that's owed to the patient. So let's think about each one of these elements, and we'll use the first element as an example in terms of how we construct our legal analysis. Remember last week I said it's important to run through each of these elements using the IRAC method of legal analysis, and that's IRAC. First you state the issue, then you state the rule, then you apply the facts to that rule, and then you come up with your conclusion. So I is for issue, R is for rule, A is for application of facts, and C is for conclusion, IRAC. So you're going to need to do an IRAC analysis for each one of these 4 elements in your legal component section of your assignment. So the issue is whether or not there was a duty. So let's take this first example, element for example. So was there a duty? Well, what's the rule? Your book will tell you what the rule is. When is that duty created? The answer is that duty is created when that physician-patient relationship is formed. So what are the facts in the case that demonstrate that physician-patient relationship was formed? And you're going to outline those facts. You're going to apply those facts to that rule. And then you're going to come up with your conclusion. I can't emphasize this enough. I'm not interested in right or wrong answers. I'm interested in reasonable answers. And a reasonable answer can only, you can only come up with a reasonable answer if your analysis was reasonable. So it's important to conduct that analysis. It's important to apply specific facts from the case to the rule. It's important to state the rule. So issue, rule, application of facts, and conclusion. So you can conclude that there was a duty based on the facts, but you need to run through that analysis. So that's element 1. Element 2 is, was there a breach of that duty? Was there a deviation from the standard of care? Well, what's the rule? Well, the rule is that you have to comply with whatever the standard of care is. Well, what are the facts that Dr. Ricketson or whoever you're analyzing from the case did not comply or did comply with the standard of care? So that, and then you, same thing. So apply the facts, come up with your conclusion. The third was causation. Did the negligence or did the acts of the defendant actually cause the harm to the patient? And we don't need to get too much into this, but there's 2 different types of causation. There's direct and proximate. And then the final element is damages. Was there harm to the patient? So all 4 of those need to be addressed and analyzed. And it's important because you may have a duty, you may have a breach of the standard of care. In the third element, you may have causation. But if there was no harm or damage to the patient, then in the legal sense, there was no negligence. The doctor could have really breached the standard of care, but if it caused no harm or damages, there was no negligence. And you could do that for any one of the elements. So you could have a duty, you could have a breach of the standard of care, but there's no causation. Maybe there was harm, even maybe the patient experienced harm, but the doctor's acts or omissions did not actually cause the harm. So there's no negligence. So all four of those elements are critical and need to be analyzed in your assignments. And we'll talk more about the standard of care as time goes on, but this is really the kind of the critical point piece in any litigation, any medical malpractice litigation. And that standard of care, like what is the standard of care? What was the doctor supposed to do or not do in a particular scenario? And there are various ways to sort of look at and analyze the standard of care. The standard of care may vary. It may vary depending on the training of the physician, on the state where the act. Sorry about that. Where the act occurred. It could depend on the type of medical center. Was it in a rural medical center? Was it in a more urban medical center? So these are the points of litigation, points of dispute that will occur in any sort of medical malpractice case. Like let's say it occurred in a rural medical center. Well, the defendant doctor will argue that the standard of care is something lower because they were in a rural area. Maybe a specialist is only available a certain limited amounts of time, maybe 2 or 3 times a month. The physician will argue that they don't have access to all the same information and studies regarding certain medications or procedures as other physicians in more urban areas might have. And of course, the plaintiff's going to argue that there's this universal standard of care that applies to everyone, even physicians in rural areas, because we all have access to the internet. We all have access to the same CMEs. We all have access to the same studies and materials that any other physician would have. And so this kind of this back and forth of what is the real standard of care, and different states apply different tests on what the standard of care should be. So, but that's the critical takeaway from that is to analyze all four of those elements. All four of those are legal components that need to be addressed and looked at in your analysis. The healthcare industry is so highly regulated, and just off the top of my head, I wrote down some of the laws and regulations that we all deal with, those of us in the healthcare industry, and this is just not even like researching it. These are just things I could think of off the top of my head. So, like HIPAA, for example, we're going to talk more about that in week 4. The Stark Law, Anti-Kickback Statute, Medicare Conditions for Coverage, False Claims Act, Beneficiary Inducement, which is another Medicare Medicaid rule, various state Medicaid rules and regulations, state fraud and abuse laws, insurance regulations, privacy rules, state privacy rules, patient abandonment rules, state licensure rules, accreditation rules, informed consent laws, Good Samaritan laws, living wills, DNRs, end-of-life issues, antitrust laws, facility-specific laws, so laws that are specific to SNFs or ambulatory surgery centers or critical access hospitals, etc. And then FDA laws and regulations. We'll get into this a little bit later in the course, but the highly regulated area of drugs and medical devices, clinical research studies, and even beyond the FDA. There's so much more that govern those types of areas in healthcare. Scope of practice laws, medical records laws, and many others. So we're obviously not going to be hitting those in any big depth, but I'm going to try to touch on a lot of those because I think it's important for the comprehensive nature of this class and really thinking about legal issues in the healthcare industry and ethical issues in the healthcare industry. But for this week, that's what we have. I want you to focus on those 4 elements. It's very important. Analyze each one of those elements. As always, please feel free to reach out with any questions or to talk through anything. I'm happy to make myself available if you need that. But if not, hope you have a great week, and I look forward to reading those assignments and the discussion question responses for the week. Take care.